"I've got it now," said Tanner, his eyes red written, no pale. He'd reached the limits of the anti-sleep medication. He had only an hour at most before either he collapsed or it started doing serious internal damage. "Let's see it," said the colonel. "I should warn you," Tanner began. "I don't need any warnings," the colonel interrupted. "Just play it." Tanner sent the file through the screen and opened it. It started to play. Tanner closed his eyes, but once the sound started, the dim hiss of static, the images flooded into his mind, anyway made worse by his imagination and his lack of sleep. He opened his eyes and looked. There wasn't much. The image had been broadcast through layers of rock, and it was in a sense that anything had gotten through at all. Tanner wished that it hadn't. At first there was only the sound of static, the image itself nothing but snow. Then little bits and pieces started to emerge. In terms of the images, it was taking on texture, a vaguely human face forming and then dissolving. What looked like a hand, what could have been a fist around a pipe, or then again been nothing at all. The sound went from a staticky hiss to a whisper, to something that sounded like a man was speaking through a mouthful of bees, something that sounded like a scream, blood curdling, a dull rhythm that might have been someone talking, someone singing a wondering, meandering nursery rhyme, and then suddenly a brief moment of clarity, a man's face, weirdly black, backlit and terrified, his skin covered with something, quickly bursting into fuzz again. "Freeze that," said the colonel. Tanner stopped the vid and spun it backward. The man's eyes had an emptiness to them. His features were strangely distorted, as if he were screaming. His face was covered with strange markings, symbols of some kind, which extended down his neck and chest and arms. "Hennessy, what's he done to himself?" asked the colonel. "What did he use to write?" "Blood, we think," said Tanner. "You can see it dripping off his hand to the left there, and there seems to be a cut on his arm. Maybe it's his own blood, maybe Dante's. If you look behind him, you'll see traces of the symbols on the walls as well, which we assume is also blood." The colonel furrowed his brow. "What do the symbols mean?" "We don't know," said Tanner. "Nobody has ever seen anything quite like them." When the colonel didn't say anything, Tanner asked, "Shall we go on?" The colonel waved his hand. "All right," he said, "go on." More hissing, more static, more vague and distorted images. At one point a brief glimpse of an arm that had been torn free of its socket, its lifeless hand curled up like a dead spider. A bit of the command chair spattered with blood, and then Hennessy was back humming to himself, swaying slightly, covered with bloody symbols. "Hello," he said, then dissolved again. He flickered in and out of existence, along with bits of words. Nothing that would be sorted out, and then something that sounded like shame, or maybe was part of another word, and then something id to know. On screen, Hennessy clutched his head and then was replaced by static in color this time. When he reappeared, he was giving the camera a strangely sarcastic smile. "Track," he said. There was a long silence. "Simply not in," he said. Then a little later, "Not care. We'll have least." Hard to make much sense of it, thought Tanner, but whatever it was it wasn't good. When Hennessy was back again with the same intense smile, he had moved closer to the camera, almost filling up the screen. "Virgins," he said, and gestured off-screen. Then he was still there, still talking, but little more than a ghost in the static, the sound completely lost until near the end he came back, the image almost clear now. "Understand he said, then a microburst of static. "Then destroy it." Hennessy moved out of the way, revealing in the command chair behind him the bits and pieces of Dantek's body. And then the vid ended. "How many people have seen this?" asked the colonel. "This particular version?" "3 or 4 technicians, but it was generally broadcast, so a lot of people may have seen different bits of it. No way to say who has seen what." "So no point killing the technicians then?" asked the colonel. "Excuse me," said Tanner. "This is bigger, Tanner," said the colonel. "Much bigger than you can even imagine. It's much more important than a life or two. There are billions of people on the earth. People are expendable. But this thing, whatever it is, this is the only one we've ever seen." "Are you saying I'm expendable?" said Tanner slowly. The colonel gave him a shrewd look. "Don't take this the wrong way," he said. "At this point, you're less expendable than nearly anyone else. But yes, if the circumstances develop in the wrong way, you're expendable. Does that bother you?" "Yes," said Tanner. "Then don't let the circumstances develop in the wrong way," the colonel said. He looked at his chronometer. "I'll give you until morning. Find out how wildly the vid is spreading and how much of it people have seen. Get some people on the ground who can ask the right questions without raising suspicions. Once we know where we stand, we'll figure out what to do."